in the face of all the turbulence and, I don't know, churn, whatever you want to call it, in the social media landscape, I thought I might do a few, or even a lot, of short clips on YouTube since I have the channel. And from my perspective, it'll just be an opportunity for me to talk about my work, which is, for me, the stuff that really matters most is the writing. And I don't know, little things. I'll talk about the various books that I've written and just my approach to writing, and I don't know, let you get a sense of who I am. The first story I ever wrote, I was 7 years old, and I typed it out on this old typewriter we had in the house, and it was on onion skin paper. I still have it somewhere. It's in a file, and it was called The Battle for Mars, and it was completely inspired by like Star Wars. So that will date me absolutely. But I wrote a space opera, just as a little kid, typing it on this really ancient typewriter. I didn't know how to type yet. I was like, that was the first thing I ever wrote, story-wise. So it was like, 1977? People always ask, well, when did you know you want to be a writer? I can pull it back to, my 7-year-old self, just loving the idea of stories. I always read. I read voraciously as a kid. Jules Verne, big favorite of mine when I was little. When I was in middle school, I absolutely loved Ray Bradbury. Martian Chronicles, The Illustrated Man, Something Wicked This Way Comes, a bunch of his short stories, a number of other things. Fahrenheit 451, of course. I loved, Bradbury had such beauty with his language. I loved that about his work. Definitely inspired me. Like, I looked at that stuff and thought, that's great. He was so good that for me, I was, even as a kid, I was like, well, I'll never reach Bradbury levels. I just couldn't. But I read his work and was always just mesmerized by his language. I remember when the first book that made me want to actually, showed me the possibility of a novel, was Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Absolutely. That book, I remember reading that book, I think I was 16 or 17, and I read that, and I remember feeling this sense of like epic scope, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, that book made me want to become a novelist. And the other one for me, which was, again, formative years, was The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And Hemingway, that book particularly hit me very hard. And, the economy of his language and the visionary nature of his work. And one could look back on and see, some of his other works perhaps stand taller than The Old Man and the Sea, but for my young teenage self, that was a big one. I also read weirdly, and this was probably because of my honors English classes that I took in high school. I went on kind of a Dostoevsky bender. Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, things like that. And I remember that was my first taste of Russian writers. And I remember being struck by those. Again, young self, teenage self. Shirley Jackson hit me, Flannery O'Connor. When I was a little older, when I was in my early 20s, I was absolutely hit by J.D. Salinger, and I read all of his books. This whole series is Seymour and Introduction, Franny and Zoe, Raise High the Roof Being Carpenters, of course, Catcher in the Rye. But like his tight prose really worked for me. And all of those writers, among others, there were others, they really affected me, for sure, in terms of letting me see the possibility of writing and language and novels and books and short stories. Another one, and this is sort of my late teens, was William Gibson. Big influence on me, especially, cyberpunk back in the day, that really struck me. I loved Neuromancer. I loved Count Zero, Burning Chrome short stories, all that stuff. Absolutely hit me William Gibson definitely made me want to write science fiction.